Thank you, Ram. Also, thank you, Radhika. Thank you, Pavin, Javita, and of course, the Tradepass team. And definitely thank you to colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. So let's dive straight in. There's money here. It is estimated that by 2050, the African internet economy is going to be worth $180 billion. And our population by then is expected to hit 2.5 billion. So we're talking about quite a bit of money and certainly the challenges of our people. Now, I have in my pocket a sachet of Panadol. Sir, you're from the Ministry of Health. How much is this sachet of Panadol? 50 shillings. So, if I were to ask you to give me 50 shillings and I give you this, would you buy it? Why? You don't trust me. That's a good one. But more importantly, you don't need it. But now, if you had a raging headache, terrible headache, and I offered you this same Panadol for 100 shillings, most of us would buy. And the lesson here, ladies and gentlemen, is that human nature, human beings, we pay for pain relief. And in this growing internet economy, there is quite a bit of pain. Today, we see young Africans crossing the desert and dying. We see young Africans who make it across the desert dying in the Mediterranean. And those who make it across both, what happens to them? Many of them become an underserved second-class citizen, whether it's in Europe or North America. And so I think it behooves us, our societies, our governments, to empower these young people. Now, bear in mind, I just talked about pain and the Panadol, the solution. The African cybersecurity solutions market in 2020, 2 years ago, was valued at $0.95 billion US. By next year, estimates range between $3.6 and $4.5 billion. And indeed, a Kenyan friend of mine, William McCanty of Sirianu, predicts that in the next 10 years, the African cybersecurity solutions, not problem, solutions market will hit anywhere between 15 to $30 billion US. So, as the lawyers amongst us would say, I put it to you, what part of that action is Kenya going to get? What jobs can Kenya or Africa generate? Indeed, what wealth can we generate? And for government, what taxes can we generate? So just because cybersecurity is a headache, it's a pain. Most of us in our compounds, again, Panadol, when we have that headache, what do? We send that young child, go down the road, buy me aspirin. You must keep in mind, somebody invented it, somebody developed it, somebody markets it, somebody transports it, somebody wholesales it, somebody retails it. Indeed, that child you send for the Panadol pockets your change. Everybody's making money from your headache. How are we going to make money from the world's headache? So this is the challenge I think we have before us. It's real. What you were just seeing on the screen is from HoneyNet in my office in Abuja. 40,000 attacks per minute, about 200,000 attacks per hour, 54 million attacks. This is a headache, but this is an opportunity. And that's one of the things I hope this conference will dwell on. Let us not continue to harp so much on the problem. We know. Please, at the end of this conference, we should be able to have articulated some solutions. And so the critical takeaway for us here, as Mikko Hyppönen, cybersecurity guru from Finland, said, we are no longer securing computers. It's not about computers. It's about society. That mama that fries food by the side of the road, is it your matatu you call them? The bus driver? The vulcanizer? They all use these devices. I'm in Kenya. This is where M-Pesa, the home of M-Pesa is. They need protection. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this society, African society, but let's zero in to our home here in Kenya. Is cybersecurity going to be a foreign exchange drain because you must buy these solutions, you must acquire them? Or is it going to be a foreign exchange gain that this society will create the jobs? And the beauty of these jobs, if you empower the youth sufficiently with the right knowledge, the tools, the connectivity, they can stay in Kenya, not in Nairobi, in Kisumu or somewhere else, Mombasa. They can stay in their homes and earn dollars and euros. So the cyber threat space is quite vast. Most of you here probably know a lot of this much better than I do. But a couple of issues I do want to raise. First of all, amongst many of our leaders, there is a misperception that cybersecurity is not an African problem to solve. Those of us in this room need to do a better job of explaining to them that this is truly a misperception on their part. There are also some geopolitical challenges, unregulated cryptocurrencies. We certainly have things like ransomware, you've all heard of these things. But very importantly, we now have the emergence of these non-state actors, many of them actually employed by states, but as a front. So these are the range of challenges we have to deal with. And each and every one of us in this room, our government officials, everybody, our mothers, our fathers, our children, we all listen to the same radio station. It's called WIIFM. What's in it for me? And that is how we have to convince our leaders, especially our political leaders, that cybersecurity is an African challenge, does need African solutions. We can make money, generate wealth, and generate taxes. Trust me, all politicians like that kind of music. Now, a friend of mine in Singapore, Barry Green, famously said, cyber criminals operate at the speed of light. Unfortunately, the rest of us, the good guys, especially law enforcement, we operate at the speed of law. And there's a natural mismatch. This means we do need to be creative, we do need to be forward-thinking, we do need to be preventive. Many of us have been led to believe, and I disagree, but we've been led to believe that cyberspace is borderless. Why? It's borderless because, for example, any of us can surf, a website in New York while we're still here, indeed, in this hall. But for law enforcement, there are borders, and these borders are jurisdiction. A police officer in Kenya cannot interrogate a server in Chicago. Likewise, a police officer in Mexico cannot interrogate a server in Lagos. So there are borders. It is just that those borders tend to be for the good guys, and the bad actors basically can operate in this quasi-borderless environment. Now, when we talk of frameworks, at the global level, we have the ITU, we have FIRST. FIRST, interestingly, is not government. It's a civil society organization. And I will want to just dwell on civil society for a moment. Too often, we look at cybersecurity as a government matter. We forget who owns the infrastructure by and large. Who owns the platforms? Private sector. We need academia for research, development, to drive and help and support the entrepreneurs, take the output of R&D to market as innovation. We need the media for our awareness. Again, the man who drives the matatu. If he's not safe, ladies and gentlemen, none of us are safe. So again, we have the regional bodies, AP CERT, ENISA in Europe. We have Africa CERT, which is a virtual CERT, by the way. And then we come down to the national level, KE CERT, I think that's what it's called. I'm more familiar with the one in Nigeria, where I'm from. And then within specialized industries, in the nuclear establishment, within banks, for example, my central bank has a fusion center. The telecoms regulator in Nigeria has a CCERT. The IT regulator has a CERRT cert, Computer Emergency Readiness and Response. So they all do essentially the same thing, but again, this just outlines it. But just as a point of note, the first cert ever, in fact, the copyright for the name cert is owned by Carnegie Mellon University. So again, this whole thing came from somewhere else, came from academia. So let us not be unduly fixated on government. Now, some years ago, Cybersecurity Malaysia studied about 53 or 54 countries. You don't need to go into the details, but just to show you, these are some of the things. And part of what we were trying to do, I collaborated with them on this, was basically to identify the reporting mechanisms. This framework, who do you report to? And so you find that a lot of organizations report to the intelligence community, report to the Ministry of Communications or Science and Tech. Some report directly to Prime Minister or Presidency, Chief of State. But again, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to disabuse the fact that it must be government. There are actually countries like Brunei where the CERT is actually private sector driven. So too is Macau. So there are different models. The framework is according to our own situation and circumstances. Now, one of the challenges you have to appreciate is that when, especially a CERT or the cybersecurity framework is unduly driven by the intelligence community, you run into some difficulties. By training, a person from intelligence takes information. They're a black hole. Indeed, your society pays an intelligence person to take information, not to blab. If you talk too much as an intelligence person, spill the beans, you're probably not going to get many promotions. But when you're operating a CERT, it's good for them, yes, to be at the back end, but not to lead, not to be at the front end. This is one of the key lessons and takeaways. So, bottom line, each country approaches its cybersecurity slightly differently. But there are some general principles. So, ITU came up with 5 domains and 34 processes, and they actually create, or they publish an annual global cybersecurity index. Why this is useful to our society is that it gives us a global measure so that we can map and measure our progress. Are we moving up in ranking? Are we moving down? Are we stagnant and others moving up? Therefore, we are still moving down. At least we have something to compare. And I think this is crucial for us. So it's good to have a look at this. So where are we in this ranking? Well, as a Nigerian, I'm very happy to say that we're above Kenya. So for my brothers and sisters from Ghana, all I can tell you at this point is our jollof rice is still better than yours. Now, when we look at the details, one of our Achilles heels, especially in Africa, is this issue of capacity development, the human being. Sometimes we get the technology right. We often also get some of the processes right, CMM and all these different kinds of standards. ISO, people is still our problem. You can see, I've highlighted down at the bottom, Kenya. You can see that there is the challenge, and in the top right corner, you'll see capacity development and actually organization structure and the countermeasures. You still need some work. Now, in my opinion, one of the things we need to do in Africa and across Africa, remember, we need to take advantage of that market. There's a market there. I didn't say global market. Africa. We need to develop a cyber solutions economy, sub-economy or industry, not of one or two companies, 1,000 micro, small, and medium-scale enterprises, 1,000 companies that employ 10 or 20 people each. Imagine the jobs. Imagine the taxes. And yes, imagine the wealth. So it is, in my opinion, not only doable, it's imperative. Now, this is a very interesting table myself and Professor Nathaniel Allen worked on. And basically, you can see that Eswatini, Kenya, and indeed Senegal are doing very, very well. So let me talk about my country, Nigeria. We did a great plan, great policy and strategy. We did a number of things. As of today, I don't know what will happen by the end of this month. I'm told differently, but as of today that I speak to you, the core institutional mechanism to drive this process has not been approved. We finished the document last year. Actually, we did it in 2020. February 23rd, 2021, President Buhari actually publicly approved and launched the project. We are now in June 2022. The institutional mechanism is not there. Now, a lot of you will say, that's the problem with Africa. We are great at policies, poor at implementation. It means something is wrong with the policy. So, we knew this was a risk. So what did we do? We made sure that each regulator, banking, telecoms, so on and so forth, identity management, took charge of implementing the policy and the strategy. So that even though the central coordination mechanism still doesn't exist, the policy is actually getting implemented. So this may be a lesson that might be good for some of your own policy development processes. So this is what our own architecture looks like. You have the president at the center. He's the national security advisor. He's the key advisor on this. He has a cybercrime advisory council. That's the national security advisor. What you see in yellow is supposed to be that institutional coordination mechanism that's not there. But we do have the CERT, the National CERT and Coordination Center. But it's just that it's supposed to be subsumed in this bigger idea. And each of the things you see in blue are basically our critical information infrastructure pillars. And this is something each country has to decide for itself. This is just an example of what somebody like me thinks the agency, that the coordinating body should look like. Again, each country will do its own. Critical takeaway, you do need some kind of educational establishment, some kind of institute, because it's about people, it's about capacity building. So, sustainability is something we also often forget. We need to evoke mechanisms. And again, we're back to how can we tap into the private sector? Public-private partnerships is one of the key ways to go. For example, in Nigeria, when we instituted our digital privacy regulation, we outsourced things like the audit and these non-enforcement and punitive components to the private sector. Today, this regulation was put in place January 2019. So just over a year, no, 3 years. But in that period of time, despite COVID, we've now created a data privacy ecosystem driven by the private sector, employing over 8,000 people. Can you imagine if each regulation employed 8,000 professionals? What would that do to your economy? You must also not leave out the military. We don't often talk about this, but the military does have a role. So you have, again, some of us, this is our opinion, you need your national mission forces that take care of some of your prime infrastructure. But you also have to have a group that protects and takes care of your military-related infrastructure very specifically. And yes, we don't talk about this much, but you do need to have offensive capability, even if it's just as a deterrent. So what are our asks? And I really want us to run away from beating the problem, beating the problem, beating the problem. What do we want? If you're standing in front of my friend Martin from GFCE, Martin will say, so what's the bottom line? What do you want? You're standing in front of Mr. Biden or Mr. Kenyatta. You're not going to dribble on and on about the problem. The man wants to know what you need to solve it. The first thing we need is some kind of cyber essentials program. A program that is adapted to Africa. The matatu driver is not, in fact, I would say is functionally illiterate. So that program has to use pictures, cartoons, diagrams, something. He's not going to read a manual. He's not going to read a lot of text. So it has to be adapted to that level of society because they're the ones using it. We also need to create syllabi. For example, in the public service, before you move from one level to the next, you often have to go to some kind of school. Management school, I don't know what it is, but in the public service, you have these institutions. Before you become a permsec, usually you would go to some kind of strategic. We need syllabi for each of those institutions. I hope Martin is listening, please. But there are others. In the military, before you go from being a colonel to a brigadier, you go to War College. So, similarly in the military, you need some kind of syllabus that at least gives you basic cybersecurity knowledge. I realize my time is short, but we need to support and empower women. No society, none, is going anywhere if you do not utilize and leverage 50% of your population. In Africa, we also add insult to injury. Another 47% our youth we don't leverage. So we do need to get all cylinders firing. We also need to empower, especially our politicians, with empirical evidence. Can the plethora of academic institutions, can one of them in Kenya specialize in cybersecurity statistics? The way Johns Hopkins University gives statistics for health, once they say it is A, we take it for granted they must be correct. We need that kind of thing in Africa so that our decision makers, especially parliamentarians, are empowered. Again, we need to change those misperceptions I spoke about by appealing through the radio station, what's in it for me, that we all listen to. We need a generation of cyber diplomats. We need them to be trained. There are ongoing discussions at the UN developing norms. In 1884, there was a meeting in Berlin, in Germany. Africa was partitioned. That's why the borders of Kenya are the way they are. The tribes are the way they are. We were not there. Today, norms are being developed. We're there, but not well enough. We need people to represent our interests, bearing in mind that norms are soft laws. We've seen examples, nuclear, outer space, laws of the sea. They evolve into hard international law over time, where we must obey. We need to develop our own early warning systems. We need to be able to leverage civil society. Civil society is very good at monitoring and evaluation, making sure that public and private sector actors are held accountable to good governance. We also need to discourage digital authoritarian tendencies. We must have freedom of speech, but more importantly, we must have freedom after the speech. So, we must build trust and stability. And at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, nobody is going to help us. Africa must help itself. Nobody will help Africans. So, we must build our people. We must engage in good practices and processes. And yes, we must develop the technology. I would beseech each and every one of you in this hall, because many of you are either policymakers or going to be, or you input on policy. As you do so, ladies and gentlemen, please note, you must, I think it is imperative, indeed I beg you, please factor the underserved, the unserved, and the unborn. They are not at the table, but they must live with the decisions and the policies that you set. Asante.
In appreciation towards the great job that he has done. Let's appreciate him. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.